Hello detectives, welcome back to Criminal Minds True Stories, where today we delve into a case as chilling as it is heartbreaking. In this story, we explore the Jeffrey Dahmer case. Prepare yourself, find a quiet place, and put on your headphones, because what you're about to hear will leave you questioning everything you think you know. Step into the shadows with me as we unravel this dark and unsettling mystery. I can still remember the way that neighborhood felt in the late 80s. It was Milwaukee, and everything seemed normal, I guess. You'd hear kids playing in the streets, see neighbors chatting on porches, and smell barbecues lighting up every weekend. But there was this one building on North 25th Street. I'd pass it on my way home from work every day, and while most apartments looked like someone cared, this one felt different. Something about it seemed off. Unkempt, quiet, almost too quiet. I didn't think much of it back then. I mean, why would I? But now, every time I think of that place, I get this sick feeling in my stomach, like I should have known what was happening inside. It wasn't until July 22nd, 1991 that the whole city, and the world really, got hit with the truth. I'll never forget that day. The news broke about a man escaping from an apartment in that building. His name was Tracy Edwards, and he ran out half naked, desperate, like he'd just survived something unimaginable. When the cops went into the apartment he came from, that's when the horror spilled out. They found pictures, Polaroids of dismembered bodies, and the smell, they said, was overwhelming, like something out of a nightmare. But it wasn't just the smell. It was what they found in the freezer, the acid drums, and the meticulous way everything was arranged. That's when Jeffrey Dahmer's name came out. And suddenly, the quiet man from apartment 213 wasn't just quiet anymore. He was the monster hiding in plain sight. I didn't know him personally, but I'd seen him a few times. Jeffrey Dahmer wasn't the kind of guy you'd notice right away. He wasn't loud or threatening, just another face in the crowd. People said he'd keep to himself, occasionally chatting with neighbors, but never giving much away. Looking back, that's probably why he got away with it for so long. Even the people who lived right next door had no clue. But here's the thing that still gets me. There were warning signs. People had complained about the smell, the strange noises at night, and even a time when one of his victims almost escaped. That kid, Conorak Synthesomphone, just 14 years old, was found wandering the streets, drugged and bleeding. Neighbors called the cops, but Dahmer convinced them it was just a lover's quarrel. They left the boy with him, and the rest, well, you know what happened. That day in July, when the cops finally caught him, it wasn't just shocking, it was infuriating. How did he go unnoticed for so long? Why did nobody put the pieces together? And how could a guy like him, someone who didn't look like a threat, commit crimes so horrifying they made seasoned detectives physically sick? I remember seeing the footage on TV of them carrying evidence out of his apartment. A freezer full of body parts, jars with preserved organs, tools for dismemberment. It wasn't just murder, it was something darker, more twisted than anyone could comprehend. And the way he talked about it later, with no remorse, like it was routine, that's the part that makes my skin crawl. When the full scope of what Dahmer had done came out, it was like the entire city went into collective shock. The details weren't just gruesome, they were incomprehensible. He wasn't just killing people, he was keeping them, freezing their body parts, eating some of them, and even trying to turn some into, I don't even know what to call it, zombies, maybe? There was this thing he did where he'd drill holes into their skulls while they were still alive, then pour acid or boiling water inside. He said he wanted to create someone who wouldn't leave him, someone completely under his control. It was beyond horrific. People couldn't believe it was real. I couldn't believe it was real. And then there was his apartment itself. I've seen pictures of the crime scene. It's burned into my brain now. The fridge had human heads inside, next to soda can. There were bones in a drawer like they were souvenirs. The whole place was a maze of atrocities. A 57-gallon drum filled with decomposing remains, a blood-stained mattress, and even a shrine he was building out of skulls. They said he was planning to use it for some kind of ritual, though even now no one really knows what he was thinking. How do you even begin to make sense of a mind like that? It's like he lived in this entirely different world, one where people were just objects to him. What shook me the most was how ordinary he seemed to everyone around him. People who knew Dahmer described him as polite, soft-spoken, even shy. He wasn't the creepy guy lurking in the shadows. He was the guy who'd offer you a beer or ask how your day was. That's what made it so much harder to reconcile the man with the monster. I remember hearing about how he worked at a chocolate factory and how his co-workers never suspected anything. He'd even bring sandwiches to share with them, which, knowing what we know now, sends chills down my spine. Was it normal food, or was it something else? It's impossible not to wonder. And the victims, God, the victims. Most of them were young men, many from marginalized communities. He preyed on the vulnerable, the ones who might not have had someone looking for them right away. That's another thing that hits hard, the way the system failed these men. There were so many chances to stop Dahmer, but it felt like nobody cared enough to connect the dots. Neighbors called the police about the smell, the noise, even the kid who escaped but was handed back to him. Every time, Dahmer's calm demeanor and a few well-placed lies let him slip through the cracks. It makes you wonder how many lives could have been saved if someone, anyone, had pushed just a little harder. The part that sticks with me the most, though, is Tracy Edwards, the man who finally got away. Hearing his story is like watching a horror movie, but knowing it's all real makes it so much worse. Tracy said Dahmer invited him to the apartment under the pretense of taking some photos for money. When he got there, Dahmer seemed friendly enough at first, offering him a drink, but that drink was spiked. Tracy started feeling off almost immediately, but by then, Dahmer had locked the door and pulled out a knife. He told him he wanted to take pictures, but everything about the situation was screaming danger. Tracy said he tried to stay calm, playing along while looking for a chance to escape. And then there was the living room. Tracy described it in court, how there were photographs of men in various states of undress, some clearly not alive. He noticed a foul odor that seemed to cling to the air, almost suffocating. And then he saw the drum in the corner of the room. He didn't know what was inside at the time, but the sheer presence of it was menacing. Dahmer forced him to sit on the bed, and Tracy later said he could see handcuffs hanging from one of the bedposts. Can you even imagine being in that position? He knew he had to act fast, but he also knew if he panicked, he might not make it out alive. It was survival in the purest, most horrifying sense. Tracy's escape was nothing short of miraculous. He managed to keep Dahmer talking, waiting for the right moment. Dahmer wasn't just calm. He was eerily calm, like he'd done this 100 times before, and knew exactly how it would end. At one point, he tried to handcuff Tracy, but only managed to secure one wrist before Tracy fought back. That moment gave him a sliver of hope. When Dahmer got distracted, maybe too confident, maybe just careless, Tracy saw his chance. He punched Dahmer in the face and bolted out of the apartment, running down the street like his life depended on it. And it did. He flagged down 2 police officers, frantic and barely able to explain what had just happened. At first, they weren't sure what to make of him. A disoriented man, shirtless, with a handcuff dangling from one wrist. But Tracy begged them to come with him, insisting there was something terrible inside that apartment. Reluctantly, they agreed. When they arrived and Dahmer opened the door, he tried to play it off like nothing was wrong. But then Tracy pointed to the photographs on the table, Polaroids of bodies, dismembered, posed in ways that made the officer's blood run cold. One of them opened a drawer and found even more pictures. That's when they realized they weren't dealing with just another criminal. This was something far worse. The moment the police started piecing together what they had stumbled upon, Dahmer knew it was over. He didn't resist when they arrested him, didn't even try to explain himself. It was like he'd been waiting for someone to catch him. But what the officers found after his arrest was the stuff of nightmares. As they searched the apartment, it became clear this wasn't just a place someone lived. It was a slaughterhouse. They found a refrigerator containing human heads, a freezer stocked with body parts, and photographs documenting his kills in chilling detail. There were even tools scattered around, saws, knives, and drills, all stained with the evidence of his crimes. But what really made the case infamous were Dahmer's confessions. Once in custody, he didn't hold back. He admitted to everything: how he lured his victims, drugged them, killed them, and in some cases, consumed their flesh. He spoke with this unsettling detachment, as if he were describing a mundane hobby. The sheer volume of his crimes stunned even the most seasoned detectives. 17 victims, each with their own story, reduced to gruesome details in Dahmer's account. He spoke about loneliness as though it justified what he had done, saying he wanted to keep his victims close to him, even in death. It was a twisted logic that only deepened the horror of what he had done. The trial was a spectacle, drawing attention from all over the world. Courtrooms aren't usually packed like that, but this was no ordinary case. Families of the victims came, desperate for answers, while the media swarmed to catch every word Dahmer said. I remember watching the coverage and seeing the raw pain on the faces of the victims' loved ones. Some of them spoke during the sentencing, and their words were like daggers. One woman, the sister of Errol Lindsay, shouted at Dahmer, calling him pure evil. Her rage was palpable, and honestly, I don't think anyone in that room blamed her. The contrast between her raw grief and Dahmer's blank, emotionless expression was haunting. And then there was Dahmer's own statement. He apologized, which seemed so hollow given the magnitude of what he'd done. He claimed he wasn't looking for forgiveness, and said he hoped his death would bring peace to the victims' families. But how do you even begin to process an apology like that? For a while, people speculated about his mental state. Was he insane, or was he just evil? Ultimately, the jury rejected his insanity defense, convicting him on 15 counts of murder. The sentence? 15 consecutive life terms. He'd spend the rest of his life in prison, but for many, it still didn't feel like justice. Nothing could undo the pain he caused. Prison didn't seem to change Dahmer much, at least not at first. He was kept isolated for his own protection, but even there he became this bizarre figure. Some inmates feared him, others were weirdly fascinated by him. Reports said he spent his days quietly, reading the Bible and reflecting on his crimes. Some even claimed he found religion, which struck a nerve with the public. How does someone like Jeffrey Dahmer find salvation? It was another layer of discomfort in a story that already defied understanding. But even behind bars, his crimes haunted him. Inmates weren't going to let him forget who he was or what he'd done. On November 28, 1994, Dahmer was assigned to work detail with 2 other inmates, Jesse Anderson and Christopher Scarver. What happened next is still debated, but one thing is clear. Scarver took matters into his own hand. Armed with a metal bar from the weight room, Scarver attacked both Dahmer and Anderson, leaving them fatally injured. Dahmer's death was brutal, and some saw it as poetic justice. Others argued that even he didn't deserve such an end. Either way, the story of Jeffrey Dahmer came to an abrupt and violent close that day in the Columbia Correctional Institution. Ashes stewie tea. Even after his death, the shadow of Jeffrey Dahmer lingered. His crimes left a stain on Milwaukee that hasn't faded, even decades later. The apartment building where he lived and carried out those horrors was eventually demolished, but people say the area still feels heavy, like the memories of what happened there are woven into the ground itself. For a long time, it felt like the city couldn't move on. Every anniversary of his arrest brought renewed media coverage, documentaries, and interviews with survivors and families of the victims. It was like ripping open a wound that had barely begun to heal. And then there's the fascination. That's the part that's hardest to wrap my head around. Some people talk about Dahmer like he's some kind of legend, even making jokes or turning him into a meme.
How do you joke about something like this, about people who were brutally taken from their families? Sickening. But I think it's because most people can't truly grasp the scale of what. It's easier to turn him into a caricature than to face the reality, the monster he was. For the families of his victims, that there's no escape. They've had to carry this weight, this unthinkable grief, while the rest of the world moves on in entertainment or horror.
That's the real tragedy. Even now, years later, there are moments when it all feels too close, too real. The sheer brutality of Dahmer's actions isn't something you just forget. I've read accounts from people who lived in the same building, and the guilt they carry is overwhelming. They wonder if they could have done something, reported the smell more persistently, questioned the strange noises. But the truth is, none of us ever think we're living next door to a serial killer. That's the thing about people like Dahmer. They don't just kill, they manipulate. They hide in plain sight, making you question your instincts, your reality. For me, the scariest part isn't what he did. It's how long he got away with it. He wasn't a ghost or some master criminal. He was a man with flaws, someone who made mistakes, and yet, for over a decade, he managed to evade justice. It makes you wonder how many other monsters are out there, walking among us, smiling, blending in, and waiting for their moment. The story of Jeffrey Dahmer isn't just about what he did, it's about everything and everyone that allowed him to keep doing it. That's what keeps me up at night, because if it happened once, it could happen again. When I think back on it all, there's this lingering unease I can't shake. Jeffrey Dahmer's story ended with his death, but the ripples of his actions keep spreading. For the victims' families, every new documentary, every article, every morbid joke on social media feels like another wound. And for the rest of us, his case is a reminder of how fragile our sense of safety really is. We like to believe we'd see the sign, that we'd recognize the evil hiding behind a friendly face. But Dahmer proved how wrong we can be, and that's what makes it so haunting. It wasn't just what he did, it was how he did it. Quietly, methodically, right under everyone's nose. That apartment, that freezer, those photographs, they've become symbols of the worst kind of human depravity. And yet the most terrifying part is that he wasn't caught by some grand investigation or clever detective work. It all came down to one man, Tracy Edwards, finding the courage to run. If he hadn't, well, who knows how much longer Dahmer would have kept going. That's the part that chills me to the bone. It wasn't fate or justice that stopped him. It was pure luck. Thank you for joining me on this journey into the unknown. If you found this story gripping, don't forget to like and subscribe to Criminal Minds True Stories for more real-life mysteries. Your support helps keep these stories alive. Until next time, stay curious, stay vigilant.